Ready, set, go!
And the truth shall set you free!
Welcome to One Life Radio.
Hey, everyone. Yes, we are going higher. Welcome to the One Life Radio podcast. This is Bernadette Fiaschetti with Marie Early, live from our home studios. Unedited, real discussions about living your best life. And today we have Mary Holland with us. Mary, how are you doing?
I'm great. Happy to be back.
Yeah, it's great to have you back, and it's great to hear the music coming up. And wow, have we got a lot to discuss, you guys. Let me introduce Mary Holland first. She serves as president and general counsel of Children's Health Defense. She left the faculty of New York University School of Law, where she served for 17 years, most recently directing its graduate lawyering program. Mary received her Master of Arts in Juris Doctorate degrees from Columbia University and her undergraduate degree from Harvard. She has worked in international public and private law, and Mary is the co-author of Vaccine Epidemic, as well as the HPV Vaccine on Trial, Seeking Justice for a Generation Betrayed. Their website is childrenshealthdefense.org, and we are going over the most read news and views of the week with Mary Holland and the Children's Health Defense, as I said, .org. I encourage you to go there and sign up for this newsletter. I get it in my mailbox, my email box every Sunday morning, and it's so informative. You just have to know this stuff. You do, especially if you have children, but even if you don't, it's just important information. But Mary, it's really, really great to have you back and on the podcast after the broadcast. So we're covering the top stories, as I said, from the Children's Health Defense Defender newsletter. But before we do, will you tell our listeners a little bit about the history and the mission of Children's Health Defense, or CHD.org?
Absolutely, with pleasure. So CHD was formed. It took on the name Children's Health Defense in 2018, but it grew out of a group called the World Mercury Project. And its mission is and has been to identify harms that are affecting children's health, environmental toxic exposures that are harming children's health, to seek justice and accountability from those who are making them happen, and put in place safeguards so that these things don't continue to happen. Mm-hmm. That's our core mission.
Yeah, it's an important mission, and there's a lot of important stories this week. Let's start with the first headline from the most read news and views of the week from the Defender newsletter. It reads, "Despicable. Facebook censors RFK Jr. campaign video, calls it a mistake." So, Mary, how can Facebook explain censoring RFK Jr. video as a mistake?
Well, they can't. And so actually Bobby Kennedy and the super PAC American Values 24 that made the film in question that's being censored, they filed a lawsuit against now Meta Platforms, Facebook, in the Northern District of California on Monday of this week. So it was not a mistake. They got so much pushback that they called it a mistake and that they thought it was spam. But I don't think they're going to get away with that. I'll bet you that there's evidence that suggests that it wasn't a mistake. And just to say, why does censorship affect children's health? Because if you can't have access to truthful information, if you can't have access to whatever information you want, you will inevitably get bad information. When there's no debate, when there's no research, when there's no competing opinions, you will eventually end up with very bad information. And there's been a lot of censorship over the last several years in the United States, unfortunately. Shockingly, really.
Well, yeah, and I think the message here is very important, too, because as Bobby Kennedy said, he's the Children's Health Defense founder and chairman on leave. He said in a press release that if supporters of all candidates do not have equal access to the digital public square, then we have a democracy in name only. And that digital public square now is so important because most people get their news off of their computers or on their phones, right?
Legacy media is dying. It's big tech that's really in control. And let me just update this story marginally, because censorship of Robert F. Kennedy Jr., our chair on leave, has been endemic. And it's fascinating. He is really probably going to have access to be on the debate stage with the two major candidates, Trump and Biden. based on 270 electoral college votes. And basically both Trump and Biden now just cut him out of the possibility to have those debates. They're not going to have those debates, and they made agreements to have other debates, cutting out RFK Jr. So the censorship candidacy is pretty shocking. Really, you want to have the freest level of expression in a democracy at elections, and that's not happening right now. So this is a bigger piece of, it's a part of the bigger situation that Children's Health Defense itself is confronting.
Well, and I don't know how you guys feel about this, Marie, but I feel like this presidential election is the most important in the history of maybe the world, because it's not just democracy here in America that we are representing. It's worldwide democracy, and this corruption has got to stop.
We are in,
and censorship.
What happened in the last several years with COVID is absolutely historically, completely unprecedented ever. So we are in a new world, and we know that the policies that we're dealing with here are essentially the same policies worldwide on things like pandemics and on surveillance and on central bank digital currencies and so on. So yes, it's an incredibly important election, and people owe it to themselves to really thoroughly investigate all the candidates, including Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who's running as an independent.
Yeah, and the film is amazing, by the way. It was so well done. And every question that you have about Bobby Kennedy was answered. I sent it to a lot of my friends. They sent it to a lot of their friends. And I feel like the campaign is really getting a lot of momentum. And I think maybe in part because of this censorship and the unfair treatment of him not even getting protection from the Secret Service. All these things, people are paying attention, I think.
People are paying attention. I think you're right. I think people say, what's up with that? What could that's so prejudicial. So, yeah, I agree.
Yeah. Marie, any comments?
Well, I was just wondering if Facebook has addressed the problem that they had in the last election and how they're going to fix, the fake accounts and things like that. And I just found an article that said they shut down thousands of accounts in 2023 to be primed for voters ahead of 2024. But do you think that they're doing enough to make sure? Obviously not.
Well, it's tricky. I don't know. I mean, we're still fighting with them from a case that we filed over 3 years ago. So I think that we have a lot to figure out at this point when it comes to social media. I do want there to be open media. I don't want them to be abused. And I don't think we've figured that out yet as a country or globally, really.
Who started American Values 2024? Who was the founder of that organization?
There's two founders, Tony Lyons, also the publisher of Skyhorse Publishing, with whom Children's Health has a joint venture, and we publish, we have a partnership and we publish books. So Tony is a co-chair, and Mark Gorton, an entrepreneur, is a co-chair. And they are really doing really important work. The super PACs, have fewer restrictions than the campaign itself. So they put out that film, and they put out an excellent Substack called Kennedy Beacon for people who are interested in that candidacy.
Good to know. All of it's good to know. Let's go to the next headline. The next headline, most read headline of the week reads, exclusive, Fauci ignored early reports of vaccine injuries, emails obtained by CHD reveal. So, Mary, how do these emails prove that Dr. Anthony Fauci knew about the COVID vaccine injuries early on?
Well, this is rather extraordinary. We put in a Freedom of Information Act request about correspondence between Dr. Fauci and others at the National Institutes of Health and people who are writing to the NIH saying, I was injured by my shot. And we disputed this with NIH and came up with a settlement in October 2023 that we would be provided 300 pages per month with retractions. And in the first batches that we've found, it's clear that literally within days of the Pfizer shot being rolled out and the Moderna shots being rolled out, that Dr. Fauci personally was aware of all of the side effects that were happening, the heart conditions, the strokes, the neurological problems, and they chose not to tell the public.
Wow.
So they basically were aware of all of this. They didn't help the people who were injured, and they didn't tell the American public. So this is shocking stuff. And Dr. Fauci is supposed to be in front of a congressional subcommittee on June 3rd. We'll see if he gets there, but there are an awful lot of questions.
Yeah, this is a shocking story. It is. Some of the stuff that I read, like Dr. Joel Walskog, he is a Wisconsin orthopedic surgeon who stopped practicing medicine after being injured by the Moderna COVID-19 vaccine, and that he told the Defender the documents prove public health officials, including Fauci, were well aware of the avalanche of adverse events that were occurring early in 2021. It's pretty astounding that nothing was said by Dr. Anthony Fauci. And how do you think this is going to turn out for him, Mary?
Well, I hope that we have far more robust. I mean, I hope that he ends up in court having to defend himself for this behavior. I don't know that that's going to happen, but at a minimum, I hope we'll have a lot more serious inquiry and investigation in Congress. Mm-hmm. I mean, this is somebody who, according to Dr. Walskog, who was really severely injured. This is Dr. Fauci, somebody who right at the beginning knew there was going to be a terrible problem on a national, global level, and he didn't do anything. So who is he serving? He obviously wasn't serving the American people. That was his job. Mm-hmm. So it's very disturbing.
Marie, you wanted to say something?
Yes, I would think these emails would be a fascinating read, but what were his email responses when people were sending him?
He didn't respond to the people who had injuries. He didn't respond. He was becoming aware of all of this. But he and in general, there were a few people at NIH who were corresponding with people. And more or less, Breanne Dressen is one who's a part now of a lawsuit against AstraZeneca. She was in the clinical trial. There were a few people who were sort of assisted by physicians at NIH, but basically they were told to keep it quiet because they really wanted the rollout of all these vaccines. So it's a disturbing story of sort of the narrative was more important than the reality. It's a safe and effective vaccine was more important than prevent harm to actual people. Mm-hmm. So a disturbing story.
Wow. And this exclusive story came out on May the 7th. Was mainstream media reporting on this, Mary? I'm being a bit facetious, but I don't watch mainstream media at all. Were they reporting on this?
No, they weren't. But they will be reporting on June 3rd's subcommittee hearing. And so maybe some of this will get into that hearing, which would be great. Mm-hmm.
Fascinating stuff. Okay, let's move to the third headline from the most read news and views of the week from the Defender newsletter. It reads, Chris Cuomo admits to taking ivermectin as new study shows it reduced the ICU admissions by 83%. Mary, what do we need to know about this story?
Well, it's very interesting that Chris Cuomo, who was one of the commentators on CNN, who was exhorting people to go back, get vaccines and shaming people who didn't get them, he now is admitting that he was himself injured by his, I believe, Moderna shot, that he has blood clots that he's seen on, an MRI with his doctor, and he's now taking ivermectin. Wow. This is a pretty stunning revelation. I don't know fully what to make of it. He admitted this in interviewing a woman who was interviewed by the New York Times. The New York Times also in the last week or a week and a half has admitted that there were people who were injured by COVID shots. So, we see a little bit of an opening of an admission that, a few people got harmed, maybe. Mm-hmm. So I don't want to exaggerate how significant this is, but there certainly has been a shift in the narrative.
Oh yeah, no, I read it and I was like, oh my gosh, that's just nuts. And I can remember we've talked about this on the air. I remember having an infamous argument with a friend of mine who watches CNN all the time and MSNBC, and that person, screamed at me, "It's horse medicine! It's horse medicine, Bernadette!" And I'm like, if you would just listen, and I tried to tell this person some stuff about it, and they were not having it. They just would not listen. They were completely brainwashed by Chris Cuomo and CNN News.
Yeah.
So,
well, there's a reason it's called programming. It works, right? Brainwash.
I love that. Well, and so, Chris was quoted in this article as saying that the doctors showed him glowing microclot stuff in his blood, which scared the bejesus out of me, he said. That really shook me up. That's a quote. And so are these the same kind of blood clots that coroners all over the world were reporting?
Yeah. Absolutely. So, people are calling these shots the clot shots, and we know that we're not quite sure exactly why, but we know that they are causing blood clots, whether it's the lipid nanoparticles or whether it's some other substance that we haven't quite figured out. But these long, fibrous blood clots are happening, and apparently Chris Cuomo seemed to see some of them, and he isn't feeling well. And he's taking ivermectin, which is often now prescribed for long COVID or COVID vaccine injury.
Wow. So much to know. Like I said at the beginning of this podcast, there is a lot of great stuff in the Defender newsletter every week. If you sign up for it, you won't get bombarded with emails or anything like that. You'll just get it in your email box every Sunday morning with the top stories and most read news and views of the week. And the next story headline from the Defender newsletter reads, "We get paid to vaccinate your children. Pediatrician reveals details of Big Pharma payola scheme." Mary, what did Dr. Paul Thomas reveal about Big Pharma's payola scheme aimed at pediatricians?
Well, I've read a lot and listened a lot to Dr. Paul Thomas, but this one was a revelation to me, where he explains that he was in a big mainstream pediatric practice in Oregon many years ago, and he said that it's basically impossible to run a normal pediatric practice without vaccinating children, because not only do you get paid for the visit, but you get paid a kind of a kickback essentially from pharma for each different shot. It could be a certain amount. So one visit, they explain in this, I think a 2-month visit would be $240, but then the big payoff comes when you have 80% of your practice by age 2 having been vaccinated according to the CDC schedule. At that point, it's a huge amount of money. And he was explaining that, to rent the space, to hire the nurses, to have the coders, to have the vaccines themselves, it's very costly. And that basically pediatricians would not be able to stay in business without vaccinating kids. And, so they're not vaccinating for the children's health. They're vaccinating to stay in business.
Mm-hmm. Well, and he wrote a book about this, too. I actually ordered a couple copies this morning for friends of mine that are pregnant. Dr. Thomas is the author of The Vaccine Friendly Plan, which it looked like a really great book. And I'm reading it from the newsletter here. Dr. Paul's safe and effective approach to immunity and health from pregnancy through your child's teen years gave parents in his practice a choice: vaccinate their child on the CDC schedule, vaccinate more slowly by waiting for the child's immune system to develop, or not vaccinate at all. I think that's an important book for every parent to read.
It's a good book. It's been out for quite a while.
Oh, okay.
Now coming out with a new book, which I think will be a much stronger endorsement of not vaccinating. He, like every pediatrician, has been on a journey, and he did a beautiful podcast on CHD, or an interview on CHD TV a couple months ago, maybe, with Dr. Bob Sears, where they both said that they went from having fully vaccinated practices to basically unvaccinated practices of children, and that, the unvaccinated kids just don't get sick, full stop. They just don't get sick.
Well, and I'm going to give a shout out for the book by Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and Dr. Brian Hooker, Vax Unvax, Let the Science Speak. I've got a copy in my hand right now. That's another great book for a gift if you have any friends that are having babies.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. We also have a great new ebook on the Children's Health Defense website, Bernadette, that I highly recommend. It's called A Parent's Guide to Healthy Children from Preconception to Early Childhood. And Dr. Paul Thomas on CHD TV is now doing a series called Pediatric Perspectives, and it really takes apart sections of this book. So this is a great free book. You just put in your email address, and it's an ebook about planning, what happens during pregnancy, planning for childbirth. It's a fantastic new book. It's like 80, 90 pages. So it has a little longer than that, but it's just a fantastic resource.
Yeah, it's important. Parenting is tough enough, as we all know that are parents out there listening. And this is a difficult thing to navigate through because you want to do the right thing for your children always. And that's just human nature. But no, I'm glad to know all of that. I'll absolutely check it out. But we're halfway already, but through the top 10 most read news and views of the week from the Defender newsletter and the children'shealthdefense.org. The next headline reads, and you mentioned this, you touched on this earlier about AstraZeneca, begins withdrawing COVID vaccines worldwide and says decision is not linked to lawsuit. Okay.
Right.
I'm calling BS on that.
Yeah. 100%. So I don't know. To be honest, it's hard to know how threatening this lawsuit is that's taking place in the UK, not in the United States. So far, the liability protections for these emergency use authorization shots in the United States, the protections have been very robust. But it's certainly true, as they say, that there's now low uptake of the AstraZeneca shots. They cause clots. They've caused many injuries and deaths. And what's to me extraordinary is they're not just withdrawing it in the UK where they were designed and marketed very heavily, but they're being withdrawn worldwide. I mentioned before because Bree Dressen is one of the founders of React-19 in the United States, a group for people who've been injured by COVID shots. And she's now suing AstraZeneca in the United States. And of course, her participation in a clinical trial is different and has different legal ramifications than simply accepting it later as an emergency use authorization product.
Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of people out there listening are asking this, was the AstraZeneca vaccine, it was replaced by the Pfizer and Moderna jabs in the EU, but are they very similar? And are we going to see the same thing follow suit with the Pfizer and the Moderna vaccines, COVID-19 vaccines?
It's a great question. I don't think we know. I think, fortunately, we do know that the demand has dropped tremendously for both those shots. Pfizer's stock is doing very poorly. Moderna's stock is also doing poorly. People are not going to get their 8th and 9th booster or whatever it is.
Yay.
But I don't know whether they're going to pull them from the market. We just don't know. I don't know, certainly.
That would be a dream.
Is AstraZeneca the one that was just one shot?
I believe so.
No, that's J&J.
Oh.
J&J was supposed to be, but AstraZeneca was more similar to J&J than to the Moderna and Pfizer. It was not. It was. I'm not sure. I don't want to misspeak, but AstraZeneca was not. Although there were clinical trials here, it was never put on the market here in the U.S.
Mm-hmm. And I'm reading here that in May of 2021, Brazil suspended the shots for pregnant women after an expectant mother died from a stroke, possibly related to the vaccine. That same month, the British Medical Journal published a study confirming evidence of blood clotting and finding a small risk after receiving just one dose of AstraZeneca's vaccine. So much to know, right? You have anything to say, Marie? Anything else? No?
I'm good.
Mary? Did you?
No, I don't. I'm
there
good
you go. Okay. This sounds I just had a little hiccup there. All right. So let's move on to the next one because we have a few more headlines to go. The next headline from the Defender newsletter at children'shealthdefense.org reads, Truth Behind the Fake Meat Industry. New film exposes health risks of lab-grown meat. Mary, what did the makers of the new documentary Beyond Impossible, The Truth Behind the Fake Meat Industry, discover about lab-grown and cultured meats?
Well, unfortunately, I haven't seen the new documentary yet, but Beyond Impossible, Impossible Burger is one of the fake meat companies that's out there. And as you know, Bern, there's a huge effort to get people to not eat meat and not eat eggs and dairy on the theory that it's too polluting to the environment. It's causing change. But this article really puts the lie to that these fake meats made with cultivated cells in a laboratory, first of all, they're not nutritious. They don't have the proper amino acids that you need. I don't know about the taste. But secondly, they're very bad for the environment. They are very toxic in terms of what pollution and what energy they require. So there's something very fishy about these products. I mean, we know that, I do see it as a part of this impending control group. You control what people eat. You control them.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And there are people like me. Okay. So, I've been a vegetarian, / vegan. I've been a pescatarian. I've been a raw vegan. I've been all over the place. But, early on, because I'm just an animal person. I'm one of those nuts that, pulls off on the side of the freeway to rescue a dog, which is a good thing and a bad thing. But what I was going to say is I've always had just this, just such a, I don't know. Because I've rescued so many animals, I have such a, what is the word? An affectionate heart, and I don't want to do any harm to any animal. So for me, it transitioned into that, okay, where I wasn't eating any meat. Even I go back so far as when we were developing the recipes for Wingstop, I tested all the sauces on French fries, Mary, instead of the actual chicken wings. And so, so I understand that aspect of it, but I will say this, these fake meats, their plant proteins are not equivalent to meat-based proteins. They don't have the collagen, right? They don't have the full spectrum of the amino acids that they need for us to be well-functioning, healthy humans. And they're made from starches, fake proteins, and seed oils. We know seed oils are so bad for us. So,
right. Absolutely.
And I agree with the perspective to you too. You control somebody's food, or you control the purse strings, right? You're controlling their life. You're controlling the world, really, when it comes to food, because we all have to eat to survive.
Right. Right. No, there's this concerted push to get rid of meat.
Yeah, there is. And I think it's too strong of a push. Again, too extreme, too extreme. Would you agree, Marie? What do you have to say over there?
What about the lab grown meat? That's actual meat. No. That's just crazy.
Scary.
To me.
Yeah. That's like Frankenstein stuff, right? Mary, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, no, I agree completely. I mean, these lab-grown meats actually use cells from animals, and they are not as nutritious. They are not good for the climate, and they're experimental. We really don't know what the long-term effects are going to be, but we can imagine, based on what we know about the nutritiousness of ultra-processed foods generally, that it's not going to be good.
Yeah, I think there needs to be more balance too, because I think America has become almost too big of meat consumers, where they feel like they have to have meat at breakfast, lunch, and dinner, like it has to be a part. And there's a lot of beautiful plant proteins out there as well. So I kind of, I find a balance in it somehow. But the one thing I've never given up, Mary, is my butter.
I love butter.
I do too. I really do. All right. Let's move on to the next most read headline of the week. It reads, more than 30 babies mistakenly vaccinated with Pfizer or GSK's RSV shot. So, Mary, how could something like this happen? Really?
Oh, Vern, it happens all the time. So there's two different RSV vaccines. There's one that's appropriate for babies and one that's appropriate for older people. And they mix them up. And these kinds happen all the time. They happened a lot with COVID shots for babies. There have been a lot of mix-ups with these RSV shots. One baby ended up in the hospital. And who knows what the longer-term effects are. We just don't know.
Yeah. Well, an RSV, it's a virus that's out there. There are millions of viruses out there. And I don't know, it just seems like it's just they're finding ways to just create more revenue so that the pediatricians, like we talked about earlier, can meet their goals, their financial goals, in order to keep their doors open.
Not just the RSV shot is, the respiratory syncytial virus vaccine is being pushed very aggressively on the elderly. They're very instilling a lot of fear about respiratory illness in the elderly. So it's, this will earn them big money.
Wow. Any thoughts over there, Marie? No,
I just think it's the RSV, they really pushed for the children's vaccinations, and now it's surprising. Well, not surprising, but
Well, weren't they
now
trying to
they're
give
going to the elderly?
Yeah, and the elderly, weren't they doing the triple shot or whatever they called it, where they were giving the flu shot, the RSV shot, and the COVID-19 shot all at the same time? How clumsy is that?
Well, I'm aware that they were combining flu and corona, the flu-rona we called it, but I wasn't aware that they were trying to do RSV together with it. But I wouldn't put it past them.
Yeah, I thought I read it somewhere. I don't have it in front of me, but it was from memory, and I could be wrong. But it's all, to me, it's just too much. And we now know that we talked about it just a minute ago. I mean, it's very well documented that there is a huge financial incentive, unfortunately, for a lot of these pediatricians who I think are probably really good doctors that just kind of got, pulled into it. And we don't know how to fix this mess. How do you think we can fix this mess worldwide, Mary? Where do you see it going?
I think we're well on our way, Bern. I really do. I think that millions, if not billions, of people are now skeptical about all vaccines. They're very skeptical about mandates. We are having legal victories around the world now when people are a little bit more sober-minded about the mandates. I think that it's going to be very tough to pull off what they want to do next, which I think is another kind of, pandemic. And so it's going to be a process, but I don't believe that 20 years from now we will have vaccine mandates and pandemics. I can't foreclose the possibility, but I actually believe that we'll get through this and we'll have wised up that you can't have one medical product for everybody and not expect that a lot of people are going to be harmed. That's just not the way we are. We're really bio-identical. We're not bio-identical. We're all bio-individual.
Right. No, that's a great point. It is. And, I was going to ask you that question at the end of the podcast because there's been several reports about this bird flu outbreak. We actually reached out to a veterinarian who's actually working on this at, I believe, the University of Wisconsin or something that we were told about from another doctor that we were going to have on the show to just discuss where we think this might be going and is it truly a threat? And is it true that the U.S. government is stockpiling bird flu vaccines right now in preparation of a possible pandemic? That's kind of concerning.
It's that I don't know. It's very possible, but the Secretary General of the UN, Dr. Tedros, not a medical doctor, has said that they are stockpiling bird flu vaccines. There's 2 new H5N1 vaccines available, flu vaccines, and by all appearances, there is going to be a bird flu pandemic. They're already saying that there's transmission from birds to cattle and cattle to humans, and they've already explained how with very few mutations you could have it be transmissible between humans. So it's certainly my expectation that at some point in the fairly near future there will be a so-called bird flu pandemic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, you can kind of see it. And Marie made a point yesterday. She felt like we were, preparing for the show. And she ran across an article where they were, attacking small farmers, like people that had like just a couple of chickens in their backyard and, creating fear there as well. And so there was one bigger, egg producer or chicken producer that was thrown into the mix. But what were your thoughts, Mariana?
Oh, well, they just didn't mention any of the big factory farms.
Right.
It was all small individual farmers.
And that's the thing. In a big factory farm like that, you're going to have viruses spread rapidly, right? And from all the filth and just all of it and are created in that kind of environment. Am I right or wrong? Am I?
Yes, they're created in that kind of environment, sure.
Yeah. So, I mean, I don't know. I hope that doesn't happen, but everyone out there listening, just don't lose your mind. And I don't think we need a vaccine for it. And we know from books like Vax on Vax. You said it earlier too, children and people that are unvaccinated are healthier than those that
right.
They're healthier.
They have more, but it doesn't. But let me just say that if, in fact, a virus has been souped up through bioweapons research, so-called gain of function, to become more transmissible and more lethal. That's what gain of function means. Right. I don't want to suggest that there's no risk to a bioweapon. There is a risk, and I'm not suggesting that people take a vaccine for it. But it's not a foregone conclusion. In fact, remember, I think it's Dr. Redfield, who had been the head of the CDC earlier. He, in the Trump administration, in fact, he warned that the bird flu could be 10 times more deadly than COVID. So there's a lot of fear-mongering going on around this.
Yeah, and I forgot about that. It's a bioweapon at this point, right? If that a lot of these,
well, there's 3 places in the U.S., including University of Wisconsin, apparently, where with federal funding, they've been doing gain-of-function research on bird flu.
Right.
So it's troubling.
Yeah, it is troubling. I have all kinds of thoughts going through my head. A veterinarian here locally that I know warned me early on. He's like, don't get the coronavirus vaccine, the COVID-19 vaccine. He said, they've been working on this for years. And like you said, like the gain of function research, and a lot of animals died is what he said. And I remember it so well. I thought, wow, and as a result of the COVID-19 vaccine, a lot of people have died as well. And it's pretty scary when you think about how big this really is. You want to say anything, Marie?
Oh, well, when I was researching too, I realized that they put a halt to gain of function research in 2014, I think it was, for several years, and then brought it back in 2019, and that's when COVID.
Right. And then I think of Bitten, about Lyme disease. Chris Newby, who we did an incredible interview with, and as a journalist, what she discovered through getting Lyme disease herself, and took her down this incredible investigation and trail where she discovered, that the problem that we have with Lyme disease in America was created from a bioweapon going back, decades, right?
Plum Island. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of evidence for that. It's not been absolutely, conclusively proven, but it's very, very likely. They were doing bioweapons research in Plum Island off of Long Island, and then and they were doing it on ticks, and then some of them escaped, and they ended up in Lyme, Connecticut, right over the Long Island Sound. I mean, it makes perfect sense.
Yeah, it does. It's a fascinating read, by the way, and I first heard about it from the Defender newsletter. You guys did a story that covered the book, and I thought it was fascinating. I read the book. Excellent book. Excellent. And what is that thing that's going on with the meat, too? That do you remember, Marie, where the beef is infected, too, with potentially where you can, I can't think of it right now. I probably shouldn't have brought it up. But do you remember it's you guys, I think you guys did a story on it, too, Mary.
I remember, and I'm having trouble calling it to mind, but it's a certain type of allergy that you can get. It's an A to the meat. I know what you're talking about. I can't pull it all to mind at the moment.
Yeah, but and it's all pretty scary. It is, and that's why I love doing this podcast with you and covering these stories, because people need to know. They need to be aware. Knowledge is power, and you'll have less anxiety over this, right? When you
don't have to be scared when you have knowledge. You just say, okay, I'm not eat ultra-processed meat, or you just say, okay, I'm going to make sure I have the medicines I need on hand, and I'm not going to be afraid, because I know that this is the kind of thing that's happening right now. So I agree that knowledge is power, and people have died in ignorance in the last 4 years. There's no question about that.
And I have to give a shout out. I wasn't planning on doing this, but I got that wellness kit from the Wellness Company, I think it's called, and Dr. Peter McCullough, I think, started it. Was it Dr.?
Yeah.
You know what I'm talking about? And I got my little emergency kit, and I love it, Mary.
Good.
I feel so empowered by it. But what were you going to say, Marie?
Well, this goes back to the flu and COVID-19 and RSV vaccines. On the CDC website, in the same page, like 2 paragraphs down, it says the CDC has reviewed the available scientific evidence and concluded that people may get the flu, COVID-19, and RSV vaccines at the same visit.
There you go.
Then 2 paragraphs down, it says, while there is no clinical trial data on getting all 3 vaccines at the same time, CDC is continuing to monitor the safety of RSV vaccines as it does for all vaccines. So in the same page, they say, we reviewed the data, but there isn't any data.
Right. Right. And right now, there's been such an extraordinary effort to do away with any real clinical trial research ahead of time. They don't have to do animal trials. They don't have to do human trials. They can just put it out there as an experimental drug. And if you take it, you're on your own. Wow. It's quite remarkable how far things have moved very quickly.
Mm-hmm. And, it's going to be an interesting election. We'll go back to that. I'm saying my prayers that Robert F. Kennedy Jr. wins so that we can straighten out this mess and hopefully, fix it. It needs to be fixed. Everyone needs to be held accountable for their sins, for lack of a better word, and stop this madness. It's gotten to the point where it's absolutely mad. But let's go to the next headline from the most read news and views of the week from the Defender newsletter. And this is connected to what I just said. It reads, 22 AGs oppose WHO pandemic treaty, citing threats to sovereignty and civil liberties. So, Mary, why are the 22 attorney generals so opposed to Biden signing the WHO pandemic treaty?
Well, it's a very strong letter, and basically they say the Biden administration does not have the authority to outsource pandemic preparedness or any kind of health care to an international body and have it be binding. This is really the purview of the states. Anything under the 10th Amendment that's not specifically given to the federal government is reserved to the states or to the people. And historically, all pandemic and just health care has really been handled at the state level in terms of crises or emergencies. And so this is a kind of power grab, we call it, and it's dangerous.
It is dangerous. And I was just thinking how lucky we are to have you with all the knowledge that you have. I mean, you're just so educated, and both of your parents were doctors. Is that right? Am I remembering right?
You're right. You're right. They were doctors, and they are not with us anymore. But I have to say, I think a lot of what's happened in the last few years would be very troubling to them. I think they cared deeply about their patients, and unfortunately, I think we saw a lot of really, really terrible things happen in hospitals in the last few years.
Well, and I do believe that doctors do go, and because several of my best friends are doctors, and they did go to medical school so that they could help people. Yeah. But then they get drawn into all this, and then it becomes very,
it's regimented.
Yeah.
They aren't allowed to make decisions.
Yeah, it's like a cult almost. Once you.
That's true. That wasn't always the way medicine was, but
Right.
that's certainly true in the last few years.
Yeah, no, it's very, very different, but it's good to talk about it. It lessens the anxiety about it. Talking about it is important, communicating, and that's why we cannot have this topic censored. That's what caused it to begin with, right? All of this confusion and this unprecedented greed that's been happening in America for about, 40, 50 years now?
Well, a while.
Maybe longer. Maybe go back. When I'm, not being recorded, I've said before, this goes back a long time, maybe even 100 years starting. It's a fascinating topic, actually, to see the history of it and the timeline of how everything has rolled out in regard to medicine and vaccines and even our food, what's happened to our food. And I don't know. It's nuts. But we've got a couple. Anything else you want to say about this story, about the WHO pandemic treaty?
No, just, yes, there is one more thing. I'm sorry about that. I do want to say, Marie, this evening, May 16 at 8 p.m. Eastern, Children's Health Defense has a roundtable on the WHO with Senator Ron Johnson, who's been in the lead in the Senate on this, and with Dr. Merrill Nass, with Dr. David Bell, and with Yanya Kellick of Epoch Times. So for anybody who's interested in this issue, I think there's going to be a very illuminating conversation about what's really at stake this evening.
Oh, I'll be watching it. And Dr. Merrill Nass, let's talk about her for a second. They the medical community basically tried to destroy her for speaking up, right? And trying to protect people.
100%. Absolutely. But she, hasn't kept her down, and she formed a great new organization called Door to Freedom that's really been exploring what's been happening with the WHO and with the Great Reset. So she is stronger than ever.
Wow. I'll be watching it and encouraging everyone out there to watch it tonight. This podcast will go out in just a few hours as soon as we get off the air. But there's two more headlines of the week to go. The next one reads, studies of 10 million people find ultra-processed foods linked to serious health issues. Mary, in this article that Dr. Joseph Mercola wrote, he writes about the many dangers of ultra-processed foods and what it poses to our health. Can we talk about it?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is important, and the mainstream has actually been covering this a little bit from this big study, because this is so significant in terms of, they looked at 10 million people. Ultra-processed foods are pretty addictive. They have fat, they have salt, they have sugar, and they're basically non-nutritive. They're really not giving you what nutrients that you need, that your body needs. And so the Mercola article just makes the point that you want to try to reduce this ultra-processed food, like, all the stuff that's in the grocery store that's not on the outside. Everything in the inside of a grocery store is essentially ultra-processed in the United States.
Yeah.
It's sugar, it's salt, it's seed oils, it's stuff that's bad for you. The only thing that's really probably halfway decent in the grocery store in the United States is around the edges, which is the dairy, the meat, the bread, and you have to be careful with all those too, but they're less likely to be the eggs. They're ultra processed, but everything in the inside of an American store that has long shelf life, right? Why is it profitable? Because they leave it on the shelf for a month until somebody buys it, or 3 months, or a year. And to do that, you have to use ingredients, preservatives. You have to use salt, sugar, stable fats, trans fats, stuff that's really not good for us.
I can remember how big the produce departments used to be when I grew up in upstate New York, and my Italian grandmother, taking me to the grocery store with her and showing me how to pick out tomatoes, right? Something as simple as that. And how different, a lot of kids today, they don't know that. They don't understand, that when you pick up a tomato and it doesn't smell like a tomato because it's been sprayed with glyphosate, or it's been mass produced, or the soil is no longer, as rich as it used to be. All those things matter. And, I would encourage everyone to start their own garden. Tomatoes are easy to grow, by the way. They really are. And so are cucumbers. A good old-fashioned tomato and cucumber sandwich in the summer. A little bit of butter and some mayonnaise. Right?
Have y'all read or heard of the Dorito effect?
Yes, but I can't recall what it is right now. That's a book, isn't it?
Yes, but it's a phenomenon, I guess, with processed foods, and they make them, since there's no nutrients in them, but the way they flavor them, our body just keeps wanting more and more, because it's trying to get those nutrients it's never going to get.
Right.
So you just keep eating them.
Well, it's nuts what we've done to our food, and even our wine. So our wine has up to 75 chemicals in it, and colorants, and artificial flavors, and all this thing. So to make it consistent and make it have longer shelf life and all these things that are more profitable, and it's understandable. It's expensive to produce, good quality, wine. And again, you could do that yourself too. We had a wine cellar growing up as a kid. That's probably why I like wine so much, but that wine was very different than the wine that you buy now, right?
Well, listen to this. The tomatoes you mentioned, it says, tomatoes found in supermarkets are bland and tasteless because tomato plants are pushed to produce more tomatoes than they can naturally support.
There you go.
Unable to fill the tomatoes with nutrients, they fill them with water, which is exactly what the tomato tastes like.
Wow. That's interesting, actually. That's really good information to have. All right. So we've got the last headline here, and we're going to wrap this up. So the last headline from this year's top 10 news, or not years, this week. Sorry, that's a typo. From this week's top news and views from the Defender newsletter: Bill Gates, Jeff Bezos, and the high cost of unequal societies. Mary, what is this story about?
Well, the story is just pointing out that in societies where there's great disparities of wealth, people just are more, they don't work as well as societies. People aren't as healthy. They're not as happy. And having these great disparities is an indicator that something's really wrong. And people do better in societies that are more equal. Ours is so unequal in terms of course, I don't think that money is everything, but when you have somebody who, like a Bill Gates or a Jeff Bezos, who's multi-billions of dollars, and then you have people who are subsisting on a few $1,000s, you just think, what's wrong with us?
Yeah, there's a lot wrong with us. When we were talking about the healthy food, the ultra processed foods, I was thinking about people that are really poor, that can't afford any other food than fast food, or people that are homeless that are scraping together change to go to the local McDonald's, whatever it is that's close enough to them. There's a lot of suffering in this country, in this world right now. And this kind of disparity in unequal societies where you've got mega rich people and mega poor people, nothing good can become of that. What do you think, Mary?
I agree. I agree. I'm not a communist, and I don't think everybody has to be treated exactly the same. But I think when you look at these incredible disparities, the kinds of disparities we have right now in the United States are greater. They're just profound. They're on par with what you saw in much more ancient societies, with a few very, very privileged people, and then essentially, a slave class. And I don't think we're quite at a slave class yet, but there are a lot of things that point towards our moving in that direction, in the wrong direction, instead of towards equality and preserving liberty and freedoms.
Yeah. Well, and I don't think it's okay to get rich at any cost and justify the means of it. And I think of vaccines, when I think about that, they know darn well, they've known for decades. They've known since the, not Smithwood, what is it? The Simpsonwood in Atlanta, Georgia, 23 years ago now. Can we talk about that for a second, Mary, before we wrap up this podcast? Because people don't really understand. They know what's going on, and they continue to harm children and people and outright lie and kill people by not telling the truth.
Well, but they're doing it for a reason, Bernadette. So just to give people a little background, Simpsonwood was a private conference held outside Atlanta, as Burns said, in 2001 about the use of thimerosal as a preservative in vaccines. It's half by weight ethyl mercury. It's very toxic to the body. It's very neurotoxic. And there's little question that the ethyl mercury in the vaccines was causing a particularly severe form of autism in children. And it was taken out but left in so-called trace amounts. But at this closed-door conference, which the transcript of which became available through Freedom of Information Act, it's very clear that these doctors and pharma people and regulators at CDC, they knew that the thimerosal was a problem, and their biggest job was to try to hide it. It was, how do we keep this out of the hands of the lawyers? How do we bury this information? Nobody should give this to anybody. And way before that, there's recognition, 100 years before, there's recognition that vaccines do a lot of harm. The reason I think I think there's two reasons that the vaccine there are many, but so some of the key reasons that the vaccine paradigm continues and it's being pushed so aggressively is it's very lucrative. You harm babies in early life, and then they need insulin, they need asthma medication, they need ADD medication, they need heart medication. It's lucrative. It's a racket. You harm people for your own profit. So it is a racket. The other thing is, if they acknowledge that the government and pharma that have been pushing this, if they acknowledge that they knew that there was harm, all these people will be tarred and feathered, right? You killed or you maim children for profit. Nobody's going to think that was really okay. And so it's the continuing cover-up of the criminality, together with the profitability of the criminality and the liability protection that they have right now. They don't have any real incentives to stop this. They have huge incentives not to stop it. I'm not saying it's ethical, don't get me wrong. It's my life's work to stop this, but I understand why unethical people would prefer to keep this gravy train going as long as just kick this can down the road, because when it stops, it's going to be very, 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 very ugly, and those people are not going to do well.
Yeah. And thank God you became a lawyer instead of a doctor, so you're well prepared for the fight. I'm sure your parents look down and go, oh my gosh, Mary, how proud they must be. Seriously. And I'm not saying that just to blow up your skirt or whatever that expression is, but I mean it with all my heart. Thank God for people like you that are educated and can fight this fight for us. So thank you so much, Mary.
It's not over.
Yeah.
And I'm so grateful for what you both are doing, Marie and Bernadette, because we need to get the word out. Education is the step. It's absolutely the first step in all of this. People need to know what they're dealing with, and so I'm grateful to you for your work.
Well, it's right back at you, and I am going to promote the hell out of this podcast on social media, and I will end the show with the words of my father that you already said earlier. It's a racket. It's a racket. I grew up with my dad saying that all the time, and that's where I get this from. So,
It's a racket.
it's a racket. He could see it clear as a bell, 50 years ago. But always a pleasure. Mary Holland, everyone. I encourage you to go to children'shealthdefense.org and check it out and get the newsletter in your mailbox every week. Thank you so much. You take care too, Mary, and have a great rest of your week. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye.